Hello everybody, those of you who watched my Ludum Dare stream for Ludum Dare 39 will probably recognize this cutscene as being the intro cutscene to the game I made. I made a daft little game about flying drones around a desert picking up parts, and in the last couple of hours I needed to write an intro of some kind to the game, so I wrote this cutscene in about like 15 minutes of just like kind of a scrolling thing with some text, and then when the text is out it tells you can hold the space key to skip it, or you can hold a key at basically any time to skip it, but if it reaches the end of the thing, it'll just bring itself through naturally like that. It's a pretty straightforward cutscene. As I say, I wrote it really quickly, and people were naturally, a few people in the chat were like, "Oh, how did you do that? You should do a tutorial on how you do cutscenes." And it's a very common question as well. It's very common, like how do I make a cutscene? I've never really done tutorials on this before because I always think it's a weird thing, because you don't really make cutscenes any differently to how you do anything else. In fact, it's easier. It's easier to make a cutscene than it is to make basically any other part of your game, primarily because there's no player input going on, right? There's limited player input. The only input you have to deal with is if you're allowing the player to skip the cutscene in some way, which we will be doing. But otherwise, the main thing you should understand is that all you're doing is making things happen in sequence, and because they happen at the same time in sequence, and because they're really consistent, you don't have to deal with any player input. It actually makes them really easy, and it means they don't break very often because there's no elements that change. There's no player input that can screw everything up. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to create some black bars, kind of give that kind of classic cutscene black bar effect, do a bit of scrolling, just so you can kind of scroll over a scene and show you how to draw some text. Obviously that won't suit every kind of cutscene that you'll want, but hopefully if I demonstrate just how you do this one kind of simple thing, you'll be able to go, right, I get it. That's how you make that'll answer the question of how you make a cutscene, or it'll probably make you realize that the question doesn't make a whole lot of sense because it just means just doing things without player input. So I'll show you how to put this one together, and hopefully that'll be a help to you, and then you can go from there to start building your own kind of cutscenes or your own different things. Alright, cool, let's get started. So I have a pretty basic setup here already, okay? I've basically just made it mimic my Ludum Dare 39 game because that's the kind of cutscene we're going to create. So I've got kind of a desert, I've got kind of an overlay cloud background with low opacity that also kind of scrolls. If I look here, horizontal speed 2, if I hit the play button, it's very subtle. It might be hard to see on the video, but the clouds are kind of scrolling. We've just got some desert tiles and a spaceship in the middle. There's no dude on it or any of the actual context from either game, but it's the basic setup, so you get the idea. Okay, so yeah, there's just a few sprites and a tile set in there for that. In this room, you'll notice the big white box over here. That's viewport 0, set up just from in the IDE. I've not done any camera code or anything fancy for this. Got enable viewports ticked. Viewport 0 is visible. The whole room is 1280 by 720, and I'm going to make the screen size 1280 by 720. So this camera is basically at 2 times zoom in, by being this small, okay? And it's going to be, so width 640, height 360, but the viewport is 1280 by 720, okay? So it'll be like zoomed in a bunch there. And I've positioned it 640 and 180 just sort of halfway down vertically and all the way to the far right of this the screens, because what we're going to do is make that scroll over to the left with our intro object, okay? Doesn't have anything else really set up going on with it, but make sure enable viewports, etc. is ticked. You can do whatever you like. As I say, this is just an example of a way you can do a simple cutscene. So if I just run the game, there's nothing going on in it. I've made an object that we're going to put all our stuff in called ointro, and I have dropped that onto an instances layer. Make sure you do that. But this is what we should see at the moment. So we're far to the right, we just see the peak of our spaceship thing here, and the clouds are scrolling and so on. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring in those black bars. I'm sure there's a proper name for those, but I can't remember what they are right now, so they're just black bars. Just to kind of give the scene a bit of focus and sort of, and so on. And then we're going to scroll to the left as well, okay? And then when we're going to fade the screen in as well, so we'll start totally blank, we'll put a fade in the middle so you can see what's going on, and then when we want to end the cutscene, we'll fade out to black. So we've got kind of a really basic transition thing going on for the cutscene as well, just so we can fit it fairly seamlessly into more or less any game you happen to be working on, okay? So that's the basic setup. The only other things I should mention, little extra things I've brought in here, is a sprite called S-Pixel that's literally a 1x1 white pixel, and you'll see how we use that in a bit. It's basically a way of drawing rectangles without using draw rectangle. It's slightly more efficient. That might be cool for you guys to learn about. And in script, I actually have the wave script from you might remember my 5 useful scripts video. That's one of them. It's just one that generates and makes a number wave between 2 values. It's optional, you don't have to include this, so if you can't be bothered going to that video to grab it out or whatever, don't worry about it. You can just, it'll be obvious when I use it, you can just decide not to use it, right? It's pretty much that simple. So as I said, I've already made an object called OIntro. Let's close this workspace because it's got a bunch of stuff from me setting up. So I've got OIntro, it's no sprite, no events, no anything, and I've plonked it just on my instances layer, just in the middle of the room. Put it on any layer you want, really, but that's where it is, and there's nothing going on in it, and this is where we're just going to write all of the stuff, all just a sequence of events that we want to happen. So it's going to make a scroll to the left, it's going to fade in the screen, it's going to draw some text along the screen, it's going to let us hold the spacebar to skip the cutscene, and everything else, okay? So the first thing we're going to do to get started with that is add the create event, okay? Pretty classic event to generally start with most objects, really, is a create event, because we always want to establish a few variables and so on that we're going to need to do all this stuff. So we've got quite a few of these to establish for this one, but they're all pretty straightforward in what they do. So the first one is going to be xpos, which I'm going to set to 640. That's going to represent the X position of our camera, okay? And just by changing this value and making it approach 0 over time, that's going to move our camera to the left, okay? It's the variable we're going to use to move us to the left, okay? So you'll see how that works in a bit. I'm going to set A to equal 1. This is the alpha, so hence A. It's going to be the alpha, or the transparency, of the giant black rectangle that we're basically going to draw over the whole screen. That's going to allow us to fade in from black and fade back to black when our cutscene is done, okay? So that's going to represent the current transparency of that rectangle. We're going to start fully black, okay, so nothing will be visible. And we're going to draw that rectangle over everything, and then we're going to slowly make that approach, probably not even 0, probably like 0.25, so we can leave kind of like a dark overlay over everything as well, just to kind of give a bit more ambience. But then when we want to fade the cutscene back out, we'll fade it all the way back to 1, and it'll just be a fully blank again, okay? How we do that is we're going to use another variable called fade out, which I'm going to set to 0, which is just going to be a boolean always 0 or always 1 value. And while it's 0, it means we want to be fading in, so while that's 0, A is going to want to approach 0 or 0.25 or whatever we use, and when we set this to 1, A is going to want to approach 1. Okay, so that basically controls, the value controls which direction this should move in at any time, okay? So while it's 0, it'll approach 0, and when it gets to 0, it'll stay there, allowing us to see the whole scene. And then when this is 1, it'll head its way back to 1, and then when it reaches 1 and this is set to 1, that's when we know to go to the next room, okay, that the cutscene is over, okay? So when both these values equal 1, that's basically when we know we're done, yeah? So the next thing I want to add is, I'll just leave a space here because it's a slightly different type of one. I'm going to type str, which stands for string. Don't use string itself because I think that's an actual function. And I'm going to set it to equal just an empty string, just with 2 quotation marks there, okay? I could write some stuff in there to make it an actual string, but I just want to leave it as a blank string. Str is going to represent the line of text at the bottom. It's going to contain the current line of text that we're trying to draw, okay? We're not going to put all of them in here, so that's why it's blank at the moment. We're just going to fill it with each line one at a time. And that's going to store the one we're currently trying to draw. And then the other string we want is I'm going to have one called print. Okay. The reason I have two blank strings for this is this string is going to contain, because we're going to draw one character at a time. You might have seen like it was drawing it kind of like a typewriter sort of effect where it's like drawing like one letter at a time. That's going to contain the whole line that we're going to try and draw, and that's going to contain where we're up to on this line. Okay, so it might only contain the first couple of letters, or it might contain the whole string. And once this equals this and a bit more time has passed, that's how we decide to move on to the next line. Okay, so next up is L equals 0. Okay, L is going to represent the letter that we're currently up to, so how many letters of string to put into print, okay, which is going to be the final string that we actually print to the screen. All very straightforward. The next one is next equals 0. Next is basically going to contain the line that we want to, basically we're going to have an array of strings that we want to draw, and this variable is going to help us decide which one of those strings is the next one in line to draw, so that we keep then getting the next string. Once we're finished with one string, we can get the next one. Just set to 0 for now. And then this one we won't use for a little bit yet, but it's called hold space equals 0. And basically this is going to be our variable that helps us decide whether or not the user has held space for long enough to skip the cutscene. Okay, it's going to be 0, and when it's above 0, we'll show a little prompt on the screen that says, that tells the user that they can hold space to skip the cutscene if they want, which we will set. So while it's 0, we don't show anything on the screen, but if the user starts mashing keys on the keyboard, we'll set it to 1 at least, and then it'll say, oh, press space to hold space to skip the cutscene. Or when all the text is finished, we can also bring this up and say like, oh, hold space to skip the cutscene. And then if the user actually does hold space, we'll continue to add to this value, okay? So it'll automatically go over 1 and start showing that display if they press space at all in the first place, right? And when hold space reaches, say, like 80 or something like that, because we'll add 1 for every frame that the space bar is held. So when it reaches 80, we can say like, okay, the user's held the space bar for like a second and a bit now. Let's skip the cutscene. Yeah. So that's very simple. That's just how that's going to work. And then finally, we actually want to put in the lines of text that we're actually going to draw to the screen. So I'm going to put this in an array called strings. Okay, so we've got struff, the current string, and then we've got strings that's going to contain the actual lines of text that we're going to draw. So we're going to establish an array. If you don't know already, you do that just by writing the word and then opening a pair of brackets and putting the index of the array that you're establishing. And then this is going to be first line of text. Okay, and then we're going to make the second line of text by setting the index to 1 and say second line of text. And sure, we'll put a third one in strings 2. This is the third, and then we'll put a \n line of text. That \n there will create, I think it's / anyway, I'll find out if I've done it wrong, it might be /, I think it's / is a special character. You used to do it with hash in GameMaker before GameMaker Studio 2. We'll insert a new line there, okay? Yeah, so we don't want the spaces around that, okay? So it'll automatically split the line of text onto 2 lines when we draw it, which is kind of handy. I think that's everything we need for the create event. So obviously at the moment this doesn't do anything, we've just established a bunch of variables. So let's make it actually do some stuff. Before we go too crazy, I'm gonna add the key pressed letters R event, and I'm just gonna put game restart. This isn't really part of the tutorial. This is just for me, so that I can restart and show you things working in the game. It just makes it easy. You can put it in if you want, but basically it just means if you press R, the game will restart. Okay, so that was quite a lot of variables and stuff set up. Hopefully you're still with me. Let's go to the step event now. So again, this is the event that happens every single frame of the game, and basically we're going to decide based on all these variables what we should be doing, and basically use the step event to move things along. Okay, so We're going to use it to increase the amount of text we're drawing on the screen. We use it to decide whether or not to move on to the next line, whether or not to start the fade out or fade in procedure, and so on. And also just to move our camera to the left, okay? So all these things that are just constantly happening, we do all of that time moving about stuff just in the step event, okay? It's very easy. We'll start off just by moving the camera. So I'm going to do camera underscore set view pause. We can use the camera set view functions here because our camera was created in the IDE and just has the basic setup, so it means we can manipulate it using these easy functions that are very similar to the functions from GameX Studio 1.x. Very similar, just to like changing the view underscore x view, for example, here. All we have to do is put in the view camera. So view camera, which turns green, 0, because it's viewport 0 that we set up. Comma, and then we just put an X and a Y for where we want to put this camera. So I'm going to put it to XPOS, which you remember from our create event at 640, and it's also just where we set it up in the room. I'm going to set it at XPOS, which is 640, and then when we decrease that over time, obviously the camera will move to the left, okay? Our Y coordinate we're going to keep the same, so I'm just going to write just hard code in 180 for that. Which again is just where it is in the room now. I'm just going to keep that consistent, and so we'll just move it to the left. And then in order to actually move it to the left, we just need to change XPOS, okay? So I'm going to say XPOS equals max, so it equals the biggest of whatever values I put into here, which is going to be itself minus 0.3 or 0, okay? So that means it's going to start at 640 and subtract 0.3, and that's usually going to be bigger than 0 until it would be less than 0, in which case we set it to 0. Okay, just kind of complex to read, but all this really does is mean that XPOS is, I'm reducing it by 0.3 every frame, but giving it a limit of 0 so that it never goes under 0. Okay, that's all I'm doing there, because we don't want it to go off the left of the screen. And also it might be useful to know if we've hit 0, whereas otherwise we might end up going past it, like if we were on 0.2. Going to negative 0.1, we'd have skipped over 0, so we want to be able to actually make sure we hit 0. Which is why we do things like max and min for subtracting and adding the things rather than just subtracting it and then trying to check if we're equal to 0 or less than or equal to 0. Okay, it's just a bit cleaner. That should actually work in and of itself, so I can just run the game now, so make sure you've remembered, as I say, to put this object into the room. Common mistake I make is to forget write an object, put loads of stuff in it, and not actually put it in the room when I test. But as you can see here, the camera is now moving to the left, slowly but surely, and we can see our ship coming into view. Let's just make sure, actually I'm going to set the frame rate to 60 as well. It doesn't really make too much of a difference here, but all the numbers I'm going to be using in this are kind of set up for timing with 60 FPS, so makes sense to use that. So yeah, we can see that now, just scrolling on. The clouds also still scrolling a bit faster than the camera, because obviously they're moving by themselves as well. And so that's the basic kind of movement of the camera done very, very simply, okay? As I say, there's no player input to worry about here, so it's all just about setting things in motion and then just watching them happen, and then doing things when the values hit the values you want them to. Cutscene stuff, very, very easy in that way, okay? Next thing I'm going to write is something that you won't see the effect of it right away, but it's what we're going to use later to cause the fade in and fade out. So you remember that fade out variable? We're going to type if not fade out, which basically is going to be like if fade out is 0, right? Because it's saying basically if it's not true in a Boolean sense, right, by putting that not in front of it. So if fade out is 0, so if it's not anything, equals, we're going to set A to equal max, again, so it's going to pick the biggest out of these values, itself minus 0.005, and 0.25, yeah, we'll go for 0.25, we won't fade it out all the way. Okay. So basically, if fade out is 0, which it is at the start, okay, we want to set A, which equals 1 at the start, to move slowly towards 0.25 from 1, okay, by 0.005 frame. You can use whatever values you want here. Maybe I shouldn't be hard coding them in as values, probably should be values in the create event or whatever, but it makes it easier for you to follow if I just sort of use these hard values here. And then if fade out isn't 0, meaning it's 1 or whatever, right? We can write else on the same line and say a equals min, whichever is the smallest of these two values, or as many values as we put into here. It doesn't have to be two values, but it is going to be two values. A plus 0.005, 1. Okay, so I'm going to increase it by 0.005, because it'll be like 0.25 probably by the time this happens. So it's going to be 0.025 and then plus a bit, plus a bit, plus a bit, plus a bit, until it would be greater than 1, in which case 1 would be the smaller of the two values from that point onwards, so it'll always just set itself to 1. Okay, which means that's all we need. So basically while this is 0, we move this towards 0.25, and while it is 1, we move this value towards 1. Okay, now a doesn't actually do anything contextually, so we won't actually see that happen yet. So let's go ahead and write that in just so we can see it happening, so we can see ourselves building up this cutscene. So let's add the draw GUI event. Okay, so the draw GUI event, it's very useful because it allows us to draw on top of basically everything else going on. It allows us to draw sort of independent of the view and the camera and just draw to the GUI, just draw to the window. Okay. Which is very, very useful for usually lots of UI stuff, okay? And in here it's useful because it allows us to draw those black bars and draw a clean fade out that we know will go over the top of everything, and so on. So I'm going to leave some space down here because we're going to come back just to remind me that to do our later stuff above this point, because we want to do this fairly late in the draw GUI event. I'm going to try draw sprite ext, okay? This stands for draw sprite extended, okay? Because there's a draw sprite command that just allows you to just draw a sprite in a given place. But draw sprite ext allows you to draw a sprite and also, and you can see the values come up at the bottom, manipulate its X scale, its Y scale, its rotation, color, and alpha. And that's very useful because what we're going to draw is draw our white pixel, okay, our 1x1 pixel, and we're going to draw it as a size and a shape that will cover the whole screen, and we're going to draw it with a black color blend, okay? And believe it or not, doing this is actually faster and more effective than doing a draw rectangle, even though that is more simple to understand, right? Just requires less computation on behalf of your graphics card because it's just taking a texture and just slapping it in a place rather than having to actually calculate the corners and so on of the rectangle it's drawing. Weirded me out. I thought the draw rectangle would be faster, but it turned out I was wrong. So I'm going to be using this instead. So I'm going to draw our pixel sprite, frame 0 of it, obviously. X and a Y, I'm going to draw a 0, 0. When you use X and Y in the draw GUI event, that does not refer to the X and Y position in the room, okay? It refers to the X and Y position on your GUI, on your application surface, okay? Which is just easiest to think of right now as your window. Not strictly true, but it is the easiest way to think of it. So 0, 0 will be top left of the screen, okay? And then we're going to scale our pixel, okay? And we know it's 1 by 1, so we just need to multiply by the number of pixels we want it to be width-wise, okay? So I want to be 1280, so it's going to stretch out from the left as well. So it's going to stretch out from the left 1,280 pixels wide, and then 720 pixels tall. So it's going to cover our entire application surface, okay? Very, very easily. Rotation 0, we don't want any rotation, so just leave it at a default angle. Color, we want to blend it with C black, okay, and this is why I made it white. We make the pixel white because then any color we blend it with makes it very easy to just set it to whatever color we want, okay. If we made it black and then tried to blend it with C white, it would remain black, okay, for lots of different reasons. Just for now, just make sure you just set this to white, and then setting your blend will set it to whatever color. It's the easiest way to do that. And then last of all, and this is the important part, we set the alpha, or the transparency, which we want to set to A, okay, and that's the value that we've been manipulating in the step event, okay. So now you'll find that because in our create event our fade out starts at 0 and our A starts at 1, it'll draw this, meaning it'll cover the screen in black, okay, the screen will be totally black. But in our step event, because fade out is 0, A is going to approach 0.25, okay, so it's going to start off fully black and then it's going to fade in, okay. It won't fade back out again because we've never set it so that fade out is 1 or anything yet, but we should now see the screen fade in. And there we go. So you can see it slowly just kind of fade in. Because it's like 0.005 every frame or something, so it's nice and slow. And that's me just hitting R there as well, just a game restart, just to show you it happening. Just so you can see it very, very clearly there. So if you came into here from a black screen or from something else, it would kind of look very smooth. So that's cool. And you'll see it's not faded out completely. It's still kind of dark and faded in. That's just added a bit of ambience, made it feel a bit sort of darker in the scene generally. Okay. The other thing I'll do in here, since we're in the Draw GUI event, is right at the top, I'm going to draw those black bars just on the screen. Okay, so I'm going to do just while we're using this line, so you can see we're just doing the same thing again. I'm going to copy and paste it twice, and I'm just going to change, instead of making this a rectangle that draws over the whole screen, 720 height, I'm just going to reduce the height on the first one to 200. So okay, so it's going to just draw a 200 wide bar there. I'm going to change the alpha just always be 1. Okay, because we just want that to always draw fully opaque, not transparent at all. I'm going to change this one to 1 as well. And with this one, we want again the same size, 120 by 200 bar, but we don't want to draw it at the top of the screen. We want to draw this one near the bottom. So let's change this to, what is it? It's going to be 720 minus 200. So we're going to change the Y to 520, okay? Again, using all these sort of hard-coded numbers like this rather than variables is not super recommended, but it works very easily in this case. So now you'll find if I run the game again, we'll still get that cool fade in because this happens afterwards, but you see we've now got these big, fancy black bars over the top of the screen. And you might already be seeing other cool things you could do with this. So like you could change this over time. Like you could change the height of this over time, like very easily on this one. Slightly more complex on this one because it's got to come up from the bottom, but it's easy enough to do as well. But like for example, if this started at 0 and was a variable that approached 200, you get that bar to actually come in over time and like grow in and like squash the scene down into kind of like we're now in cutscene mode type of thing, which might be a cool thing for you to do if you're not doing a room-based cutscene. But just to show you how flexible and easy it is to kind of do this stuff, really, once you start thinking about it and thinking about all the things you can do. Okay, so that's that. We're going to come back now to our step event, and we're going to do some more stuff with the text, okay? Okay, so we now we've got all that out of the way, we need to look at how we're actually going to draw this text to the screen. So we remember this L equals 0 here. That's determining what letter we're on, L for letter, okay? It's a little misleading. You could confuse it for line, I guess, which isn't what we want, but we get what we're given. I'm not the best at naming variables. So L, I'm gonna do L plus equal 0.5, okay? We can't get more half a letter, right? So by changing this and making it half a letter just means that we just slow the speed at which we add a letter. So this will add 1 full letter every 2 frames rather than every 1 frame, okay? And if we wanted to add 2 letters a frame, we could set it to 2. Or if we want to add a letter every 4 frames, we could set it to 0.25 and so on, okay? I'm going to stay with 0.5, 1 letter every 2 frames. There's a decent way of sort of bringing the letters onto the screen, okay? Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy an amount of str, which I know doesn't contain anything yet, but I told you what it would do earlier, into print, okay? So remember these 2 empty strings, okay? I'm going to basically copy a section of whatever's in here, which as you might remember will be the full line. So say at the beginning, str is going to contain this full line, okay? But print is going to contain a section of that line depending on where L is up to, okay? So I'm going to say print to equal string underscore copy str1 L, okay? So what string copy do? Well, it literally does what it says on the tin. It copies the entire contents of one string. Sorry, not the entire contents. It copies some of the contents of one string, can be all of it, and puts it into another string. How much of that string you copy is determined by these 2 values. So here you decide where to start copying from. Unlike other things, you don't use 0 for the beginning, you use 1 for the beginning of this for the first letter, okay? So from the first letter, the actual first letter this time, And then you determine how many letters to take from there. Okay, so it's index and count, as it says at the bottom here. So from the first letter and L number of characters, which will start at 0.5, so it'll be none, right, because you can't take half a letter. But then on the next frame it'll be 1, and 2 frames after that it'll be 2, and so on. So it'll slowly copy more and more of this string into print, okay? And that overwrites it every time, so it's not just adding it on the end. It just overwrites print with a new copy of string that's slightly longer and longer than it had before, and that's how you create the kind of typewriter effect where the string builds up over time. Okay, now we just need to write a section for determining, well, here's what we'll do first actually. Before I do any of that, I'm going to write str equals strings next. Okay, and that's going to actually set str to contain whichever of those initial strings we want. Next is 0 at the beginning, so it'll be string 0, which will be our first line of text. When we set next to 1, that'll then become string 1. When we set to 2, it'll be string 2, and so on, okay? So just by doing that, that's the moment we don't manipulate next or anything like that, right? But that'll just make it so that str is always going to contain the first line of text. So let's now pop back to our draw GUI event. This is just so I can show you it build. I'm kind of popping back and forth, but it's just so I can sort of show you it building up over time. I'm gonna first of all just do some basic draw set stuff to set up our font and everything. So draw set color, I'm gonna make the text white, so C white. Draw set H align, that's horizontal alignment, just like if you've used Word, MS Word and so on, right? We're just gonna make it center aligned. Vertical align. Always important to set these when you do text, and always set them for every bit of text you draw, and don't just assume it'll be set from the last thing, okay? Otherwise you'll run into weird bugs with your text. Always remember to set these things every time you do anything with text. Draw set font. Pixel, I didn't show that at the beginning, but that's just another thing I set up beforehand. Just brought in a simple pixel font. You can use whatever font you like. Dafont.com is good for finding cool fonts and stuff. There's lots of cool font websites. That's just a silly little pixel font. So that's all my setup stuff done for drawing text, and then I'm just going to do draw underscore text. And again, this is draw GUI, so it's screen relative, not room relative coordinate wise. 640. So in the middle of the screen, and 600, so near the bottom of the screen, and print is the text that we want to draw. That's the amount of the text that we've built up so far, okay? So if I run that now, we should see that string just sort of build up over time, yeah? So you see first line of text just sort of coming in there, like that. A bit of it seems to be done already, and that's because, like, there's a brief period of time where you can't see anything, where everything's just blank, right? While that's building up, but that's okay. So that's the first line of text. So now we obviously need to make it so that we move on to the next line of text. This is why I did it, so you can see where we're up to, so you can kind of keep track of what's going on. But we're getting somewhere, right? We're just slowly building up this process over time. So let's split these things apart, because we want to set this after we've decided which line we should actually be using, okay? Which line of this array we actually want to reference. So if L, that's the number of letters we're drawing of the string so far, is greater than string length str plus 100. Okay. So what does that mean? That's so when L, that's the number of letters we're drawing to the screen, is greater than the full contents of str, the full contents of the string that we're trying to currently draw. So all of this. So once it's greater than all of that, so we're drawing all those letters, plus just 100 more. You can use whatever value you feel is best for this and just play with it to get it right. This will determine how long after the full string has been drawn we move on to the next one. 100 means like it's going to take, well, adding 0.5 a frame, it's going to take 200 frames. 200 frames after the string's been fully drawn for it to reach that point, which at 60 frames a second is going to come to something like just over 3 seconds, right? So just over 3 seconds worth of time after each string. That's enough time to probably read the string. That feels like it'll be all right. And, so I'm going to use 2 ampersand symbols just for and. You can also use the word and, I believe. And next, which is currently 0, is less than array length 1d. It would actually be more efficient to put this function into a variable at the start, but it's not a big deal. Strings -1. Okay. What that means is we haven't reached the end. Okay, so it'll keep cycling through these until next is once next is 2. So it's the length, because the array length here is 3, right? There's 3 entries in here. And once next equals 2, we don't want next to equal 3 because there is no strings 3. So we want it to be less than the array length -1. So 3 minus 1 is 2, so it's got to be 2 or less, okay? So as long as those conditions are true, we can move on to the next line. So first thing I want to do is probably set L to equal 0, right? So we put this back to the beginning so that this doesn't just trigger again, and so that we put ourselves back to, drawing it letter by letter again. And then next equals next +1. In fact, since we're only adding 1 to it, we can just do next ++, okay? Just a quick way of adding 1 to a thing. You can also do minus minus subtract 1. And then if next equals array length 1d strings -1. So if we're on the last string, or we're already on that last string, so next equals 2, basically, hold space ++. Okay? What that then will do is make it so that we move this to 1, and we move that to 1, and so that we'll use that value then to show the hold space to skip thing on the screen, okay? You'll see how that comes into effect a bit more later. But for now, this should, basically, if I run that from there, should mean we cycle through those 3 text lines. Okay, so we've got first line of text, then about 3 seconds after that, second line of text, and about 3 seconds after that. This is the third line of text and split onto 2 lines. You can see that \n thing working there. It's pretty useful. And then it won't go on any further, and it won't crash us because it's not going to try and find a string that's that doesn't exist in that array. Okay, so it'll just do those 3, and then that's when we know as well that we're done with our text, and we can start saying, okay, skip the rest of this kind of scrolling thing, or let the user just sit and watch it scroll by if they want, whatever word we want to do. Okay, so that's actually doing all of our cutscene stuff. Really, that's all of it. All we need to do now is make it so the cutscene actually ends, okay? Because at the moment it doesn't end. So in the step event, first thing I'm going to do is type if keyboard check direct, yeah, why not? VK space. So if we're pressing the space key while this step event is happening, hold space ++, okay? So that we can hold that and it'll just continue to increase every frame that we're holding spacebar by 1. Then after that, I'm going to type if hold space is greater than 80, or, so I can write or, but I'm going to use the 2 straight vertical lines because that's how I'm used to it. You can just write or if it's easy for you to read, I wouldn't blame you. Xpos, so remember this, which is moving every single frame, is less than 100, so say our camera has kind of reached that point. We don't want it to do it right at 0 because then the camera will stop moving and it'll look kind of weird. But while it's still moving, but it's basically reached the end, fade out equals 1. Okay? And then when we set fade out to 1, we've already got it set up that this fade out will happen and will fade to black. Okay? What I would then do, and I'm actually going to comment this out after I've written it, but I'm going to write if a equals 1, so if our alpha, I discussed this right at the start of the video, our alpha is 1, and fade out, not cancel, fade out is 1, room, go to, next. Okay, and then that would basically ensure that once the fade out is complete, we move on to the next room, but we don't have a next room to move on to, so I'm just going to comment that out just so we go to blank first of all. So we should see now that basically happen, right? Like this whole thing should kind of work. I'll do it with, I'll just let it play through first. So we see it faded in, second line of text happened, third line of text should happen. There's no more text from this point onwards, and once we've done that as well, we'll make it so we get see the press space to skip. We'll bring that up at the bottom here, just to show the player that they can do something to skip it. If I held space right now, it would skip it, but I'm just going to demonstrate that when this gets to about 100, over here, yep, that triggers the fade out, and then from here, when this is 1, it won't go over 1. We would normally go to the next room, but I can't allow because there is no next room. I could set, in fact, what I'll do is I'll uncomment this and I'll just set it to game restart, right? So it'll just send us back to the beginning again, okay? And then let me demonstrate that again, just using the spacebar this time. So yeah, I'm reading this. I'll get to the second line of text, and then say I'm bored of this cutscene now. I'm just gonna hold space, and then when that hits 80. It triggers that and it'll just restart. It'll fade everything back out. So I'll just hold space again. I'll just quietly fade it out like that. Okay. So our last thing to do now is what I'm going to do is draw that text on the screen that tells us that we can hold space to skip. Okay, we don't want to draw it all the time because like it's a bit anti-immersive. So like we'll only draw it if we kind of need to. So let's go into the draw GUI, draw GUI, draw GUI, however you want to pronounce it. Event. Underneath this text stuff, I'm going to type if hold space is greater than 0. So say we've pressed the space key already, or in the step event here, where is it? Yeah, in here, if we've run out of text, we kind of want to say you don't have to watch the rest of this scrolling thing if you want. We can just you can skip this whenever you're done reading, type of thing, you know. Because that's when we add 1 to it there. So just if it's greater than 0. If it is greater than 0, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set draw set alpha, which sets our current transparency for drawing, to wave, okay? This is optional. You can completely skip this line if you don't want to bring in the wave script. What it does is it just moves one value between 2 values over time and just sort of bounces them back and forth constantly. Very, very useful. We take the value... we want to take the minimum value, 0.2, and we want to take the maximum value, 0.8. And we're going to wave between those values over 1 second with 0 offset. Okay, those are the 4 arguments for that script. So we're going to wave the alpha between 0.2 and 0.8. And you'll see basically this just means that we sort of flash or kind of pulse the text on the screen, okay? Just to sort of draw a bit of attention to it and be like, hey, you can do this, and sort of present it in kind of a smooth, nice way. So draw text, I'm going to draw us more or less in the same place, so 640, but we want it to be clearly under any text we're drawing from this, so not 600 but 660, I think we'll do. Hold space to skip. Okay, and then importantly afterwards, if you have used the draw set alpha thing, set it back to normal. Again afterwards, draw set alpha 1. So if you don't want to use that wave line, just get rid of this line and get rid of this line, and it'll just draw it in full alpha, and that's absolutely fine as well. Or you can draw it however you want to, up to you. Okay, so now the last thing I'll do before I show you this working is I'm going to add the key pressed any event, okay? So if we just press any key, this event will trigger. And what I'm going to do is if hold space equals 0, hold space plus plus. Okay, and this is just sort of a design thing that I like to do. Basically, if since we don't want to show this to the player all the time, but if the player is mashing keys on their keyboard, it's likely, and during a cutscene, it's likely because they're frustrated or they're bored and they don't want to see it anymore. They want to do some other thing, right? Or they're fishing, basically to see if there is a way to skip the cutscene. That's basically the only reason a user would press a key during a cutscene. Sometimes accidental, though, which is why we don't want to actually skip the cutscene if they just press anything. But if they do press it, if this is 0, we're gonna increase it by 1 so that we start drawing this hold space to skip on the screen. Just so that we say, oh, hey, we think you might want to skip this cutscene. Here's how you do it if you do want to, okay? Just as a nice sort of design flourish kind of thing on the end there. So at the moment we don't see anything here, but if I just start to press keys, you see hold space to skip comes up there at the bottom. And if you see if I hold space, we already know that works and we skip it, okay? Again, if I press space, see it does the same thing. But also what'll happen is, since we're primarily concerned with the user seeing these lines of text, okay? This is a nice visual, but it's not super important. So once we've drawn the last line of text, we bring this up automatically without pressing anything. Let's show you that again. So first line of text, wait 3 seconds, second line of text, and then 3 seconds after that, third line of text, hold space to skip, okay? That's what we did in the step event here when we said if we've run out of strings, basically, increase this to 1, and then the user can hold space if they want to skip the rest, or they can not. They can just sit and chat and enjoy the kind of the scrolling thing. Up to them, but that's because we've got all the important stuff out of the cutscene out of the way, and then when it scrolls all the way really far left, we're like, okay, yeah, we're really done with this now, and then we bring ourselves into the game, or in this case, we restart. And that's all there is to it, okay? I say that's all there is to it. I suppose it's quite a long one, but I hope that helps. Like, it's always a really difficult question, as I say, to answer, like, how do you do a cutscene? Because this is obviously only a very one specific type of cutscene, and it depends what kind of game you're making. But the general idea that I've tried to get across with this is that it's all usually just about moving variables from 0 to 1 or from one value to another, and then deciding what to do when those values hit their maximums or their minimums and so on. As you can see, we're just, throughout this whole thing, it's all just a matter of move this towards this, and then when it hits this, do this, and then move this towards this, and when it hits this, do this, reset that to this, and so on, and then just a matter of drawing a bunch of stuff on the screen as a result. If you understand that logic, then you can do basically any kind of cutscene, right? Any kind at all. And it's easy enough to then interrupt this, like with in here, where like we're automatically drawing each next text. Instead of doing this, we could say we do this, and then the user presses a key on the end, okay? So that then you have to press a button in order to move between each line of text, and so on. Because that's kind of the only interaction a player can have with the cutscene, is whether or not to skip it or whether or not to progress it. It makes it really straightforward to actually build this kind of stuff, because it really is just take a variable, increase that variable, when it hits this number, do this, okay? And that's the whole logic I generally use to make cutscenes, okay? So hopefully that logic and that idea is what I've hopefully got across throughout this kind of long video. So there's a kind of cutscene, along with the general concept of how you do cutscenes generally, or how I do cutscenes generally. Hope that was useful to you guys. Next week we'll be carrying on with the platformer video as standard. Then after that, and I've already told my Patreon supporters about this, I'm probably going to be taking a bit of a week off, okay? Because, well, for a bunch of reasons. But then the week after that, I'll be back with, I think, a tile collisions tutorial. I think that's what my Patreon people voted for. So yeah, we've got a bunch of cool stuff coming up, and I'll see you guys when I see you. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time. As always, a huge shout outs to my Patreon supporters, without whom none of this work would be possible. A special shout out in particular, and in no particular order, to Dan, Inner Mule, Stephen Hagen, Alex Ray, Giles Montgomery, Rock Zom, Harold Guidry, Jason McMillan, Angel Rodriguez, and Owen Morgan. Thank you all very much for your continued support. I'll see you all next week.